Mm. A very warm welcome to all the attendees. Myself, Kamakshi Shureka, um, on behalf of JIS Institute of Advanced Studies and Research, in short, JIS IASR family, I'm welcoming all of you for today's webinar by Dr. Rachana Banerjee. And the topic for today's webinar is human microbiome and its influence on health and diseases. So before giving the platform to Dr. Rachana Banerjee, I would like to say a few words for her. So Dr. Rachana Banerjee did her PhD from Department of Biophysics, Molecular Biology and Bioinformatics from Rajabazar Science College, University of Calcutta. She did her postdoc from Structural Biology and Bioinformatics Division of Indian Institute of Chemical Biology, Kolkata. So she is a very talented researcher and her research interests are analysis of genomic signature of pathogenic microbes for nosocomial infection. And along with that, she is interested in typifying a viral strain from the perspective of its pandemic causing potential, which is a very necessary field these days, especially in this COVID-19 pandemic era. And also, along with all these things, she is very much interested in analyzing the functional attributes of human microbiome, which is a very interesting field of research these days. And her topic for today's talk is also regarding that human microbiome. So over to you, Dr. Banerjee.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shureka, for hosting. Can I have the option to share my screen? Is it visible? Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of GIS Institute of Advanced Studies and Research, Kolkata. GIS Institute of Advanced Studies and Research, abbreviated as GIS ISR, is a newborn institute under the aegis of GIS University. We are located at Sector 5, Salt Lake. Before I give a brief introduction of my institute and start today's talk, let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Rachana Banerjee, working as an assistant professor in the Center for Health Science and Technology, GIS ISR, Kolkata. GIS ISR is a postgraduate institute. It started its journey a couple of months before under the leadership of Padma Shri Professor Ajay Kumar Ray. We offer industry-oriented, postgraduate and translational research program in some of the most relevant areas of science and technology. Currently, we are having 3 centers: Center for Data Science, Center for Health Science and Technology, and Center for Interdisciplinary Sciences. The current webinar series, that is on the topic biotechnology and bioinformatics in health and diseases, is arranged by our center, Center for Health Science and Technology. In short, we call it CHASE. In the Center for Health Science and Technology, we offer 2 master's programs, MTech in Bioinformatics, and MSc in Medical Biotechnology and Bioinformatics. These programs are carefully chosen in response to the ever-increasing call of technological expertise in both academic and industry sector of health sciences, putting the qualified bioinformatics professionals in high demand for top salary jobs worldwide. Surprisingly, while such a field is of so demand and such programs are being offered everywhere across the world, we are the only institute in Kolkata offering postgraduate courses in bioinformatics and medical biotechnology. We also offer PhD and integrated master's PhD programs in bioinformatics, medical microbiology, cancer biology, and biomedical engineering. And here lies our uniqueness. We represent a unique research-based education system, biotechnology and bioinformatics program with special thrust in health medicine, keeping in mind industry-oriented real-life problems. Advanced molecular genomics, biotechnology and bioinformatics labs, internationally experienced faculty team, prestigious high-budget ongoing research grants. We also have extensive collaborations with multiple Indian as well as US companies and with renowned labs from US and German universities. Several ongoing research projects funded by DBT, ICMR, DBT Wellcome Trust, DBT Ramalinga Swamy Fellowship are available in our institute. Let's have a quick look at our research interest. So we have bacterial virulence and antibiotic research focus. And we also have research focus towards human microbiome and metagenomics, molecular modeling and drug designing, medical microbiology, medical imaging, and machine learning. We are having high-end laboratory facilities with avant-garde equipments like Illumina MiSeq sequencer machine. We also offer computational services related to huge data analysis. Illumina MiSeq offers DNA sequencing like small whole genome sequencing, chip sequencing, amplicon-based targeted gene sequencing, 60S metagenomic sequencing, along with RNA sequencing also. This is our faculty profile. Our faculties are having patents and publication in premier journals like Nature Group, Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, and so on. Consult our website for more information about our faculties. The foremost objective of our MSc and MTech programs is to offer the students a solid foundation on all the different aspects of computational biology and bioinformatics applications throughout the 4 semesters. Keeping in mind that students could be from diverse streams with little or no exposure of either biology or computational analysis, the entire first semester is designed to provide a clear conceptual understanding of biology, statistics, with an exposure to the programming languages. Apart from the regular subject-oriented topics, our programs also include topics like research methodology, career development, entrepreneurship, along with intellectual property rights. Admission is going on in our institute. For any admission-related updates, please feel free to call us and drop us an email at biosint@jisisr.org. Also, you can visit our website and our Facebook page. Now it's the time for today's talk. If you have any question, please write in the question and answer section. We will discuss at the end of the talk. Today I'm going to discuss about the indigenous microbial communities present in our body, that is the human microbiota, and how these beneficial colonizers are essential for our development, immunity, and nutrition. My talk is designed for BSc and master students and for anyone who is willing to get an overview about the human microbiome. The first phase of my talk will describe what is human microbiome, and then I am willing to discuss very briefly the basic procedures, some of the basic procedures involved in the analysis of microbiome. And finally, I will discuss about the role of human microbiome in health and diseases. what it means to be a human. We are born consistently of our eukaryotic human cells. But over the first several years of our life, our skin surface, our oral cavity, our gut are colonized by tremendous diversity of bacteria, archaea, fungi, and viruses. Normally, the human body is inhabited by 100 trillions of non-human cells, that is the microbial cells, which is nearly 3 times more than human cells. These microbes are common cells, helping to digest our food and to maintain our immune systems. The human microbiome has long been known to influence the human health and disease, but only recently we began to appreciate the breadth of its involvement. This is almost entirely due to the recent availability of the high throughput sequencing to provide an effective and efficient and cost-effective tool for investigating the members of the microbial community. Therefore, dysfunction of these microbes are increasingly linked to diseases ranging from inflammatory bowel disease to diabetes to antibiotic-resistant infection. What is human microbiota and what is human microbiome? Two very newer terms are now used in health sciences. They are microbiota and microbiome. Microbiota refers to the bioecological community composed of multiple symbiotic commensals and pathogenic organisms. It contains trillions of bacteria, it contains fungi, viruses, protists, and archaea. It's like any community with members that work to keep it whole. Of course, it contains bad elements also, but if that bad element can be kept in check, the community can, of course, function pretty well, even under pressure. The human microbiota can be considered to be an essential organ carrying approximately 150 times more genes than are found in the entire human genome. On the other hand, human microbiome is referred to the genomic content of the human microbiota inhabiting a particular site in the human body. Chronic diseases like obesity, inflammatory bowel disease, diabetes mellitus, metabolic syndrome, atherosclerosis, alcoholic liver disease, etc. have been associated with this human microbiome. The potential of human microbiome as an early detection biomarker and target for therapeutic intervention is a vibrant area of today's, or we can say, modern research. Next, I come to the role of the human microbiome. First, the microbiome has the potential to increase the energy extraction from food, increase the nutrient harvest, and alter the appetite signaling. The microbiota contains far more versatile metabolic genes than are found in the human genome and provides human with unique and specific enzymes and biochemical pathways. Second, the human microbiota provides a physical barrier and protect its host against the foreign pathogens through competitive exclusions and the production of antimicrobial substances. And finally, the microbiota is essential in the development of the intestinal mucosa and immune system of the host. For example, germ-free animals have abnormal number of several immune cell types, deficits in local and systemic lymphoid structures, and poorly formed spleens and lymph nodes. What is the composition of human microbiota? The human body contains many different sites that are colonized by microbial communities during the neonatal and childhood development and throughout the lifetime of the individual in healthy and disease states. Predominant of bacterial phyla in the human body, regardless of body site, include the Actinobacterium, Bacteroidetes, Firmicutes, and the Proteobacteria. Bacterial species populations vary significantly between the individuals. And bacterial community compositions also appear to be driven primarily by the body habitat, as I have shown in this figure. Human skin differs dramatically in terms of the predominant bacterial phyla like Actinobacteria, Firmicutes, or Proteobacteria, depending on the location of the skin sites and the relative humidity of the skin. The phylum Bacteroidetes is a minor component of the human microbiome, while the Firmicutes comprise the major phylum in the human vagina. On the other hand, the GI tract or the gastrointestinal tract have predominance of the Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes, and especially in the children and even in the adults also. So that is also found, you can see in this in the figure that I have provided in this slide. The intestinal microbiome undergoes dynamic changes during the development, with the most dramatic changes in composition occur throughout the infancy and childhood. The diversity and flux of microbes observed during this time are believed to be important for the normal functional development of the human immune system. Now, how the microbiome changes in the first few weeks after birth. Facultative bacteria like E. coli, Enterococcus, Streptococcus, Staphylococcus colonize the sterile and aerobic newborn GI tract. When we are newborn and in the first few days of the life, the facultative bacteria colonize our sterile and aerobic newborn GI tract. After the first few weeks of the life, anaerobic conditions are created in the gut due to the consumption of oxygen by these facultative bacteria. And this environment, coupled with the presence of the human milk oligosaccharide, leads to the shift in the composition of these predominantly anaerobic bacteria such as Bacteroides, Bifidobacterium, and Clostridium. So at first we are having the facultative microorganisms, and with the time we are getting the anaerobic bacteria such as Bacteroides, Bifidobacterium, and Clostridium. Development of a core microbiome, which can refer to a set of microbes, may occur by the end of our infancy. The gut microbiota of juveniles and teenagers differ significantly from that of the adults. This indicates that the human microbiome may be evolving during our childhood and the adolescence period. This is a very interesting thing, that is the enterotypes of the bacteria. Long-term dietary patterns have a powerful influence on the gut microbiota composition, and they are associated with three types of gut microbial profile. These are called the gut bacterial enterotypes, we can say. Three distinct exclusive enterotypes of bacterial patterns in the intestinal microbiome have been found among the adults from multiple countries, which are characterized by the first one. You can see that is the enterotype 1 is the predominance of the genera Bacteroides. The second enterotype is the predominant of the genera Prevotella, and the third type is the predominant of the genera Rheuminococcus. The predominance of these Bacteroids, that is the first one, have been found to be associated with high protein and animal fat diets. Whereas the predominance of the Prevotella, that is the second enterotype, has been found to be associated with carbohydrate-rich diets. And the third type, that is the predominance of the Rheuminococcus genera, has been found to be associated with the resistant starch diet. These enterotypes correlated with our health status. What is dysbiosis? What is the significance of this? The human microbiome forms a complex, discrete ecosystem that adapts to the environmental conditions of each niche area. From childbirth, a steady interaction between the human body and its indigenous microbiota begins. These interactions play a very important role in maintaining the general health and well-being. A balanced microbiota has shown to play an important role in our health sustenance. However, an alternation in the microbial community of human microbiota that we call the dysbiosis can lead to the life-threatening diseases ranging from cancer, cardiovascular diseases, inflammatory bowel diseases, and some of the difficult to treat bacterial diseases. And some of them are, of course, due to the antibiotic resistance. Tomorrow, we are going to have an enchanting talk by Dr. Sujoy Chattopadhyay, our head of the department. He will explain you in details about these infectious diseases and microbial evolution. Do not miss his talk. Next, I come how we started the study of the human microbiome. As I already mentioned, that it was not possible if the high throughput sequencing was not invented. It was found that historically the members of a microbial community were identified by the stains, gram stains, that targeted their physiological characteristics. We all know that is called the gram stain. This could distinguish many broad clades of bacteria, but were non-specific at lower taxonomic levels. Thus, microbiology was almost entirely culture dependent at that time. This approach limited the range of the organisms that would actively grow in laboratory culture. The vast majority of the microbial species have never been grown in the laboratory, and options for studying and quantifying those organisms were severely limited. Until the development of the DNA-based culture-independent methods in 1980s. Culture-independent techniques allowed us to investigate several aspects of microbial communities. The earliest DNA-based methods extracted community DNA for the genes of interest by hybridization, or amplified specifically targeted genes by PCR prior to the sequencing. One of the earliest targeted metagenomic assay for studying uncultured communities without prior DNA extraction was the FISH, the fluorescent in situ hybridization technique. However, it remains primarily low throughput, imaging-based technology. To investigate the microbial communities more efficiently, we then found the high throughput DNA sequencing methods. And it was used in combination with other genome scale platforms such as proteomics, metabolomics, etc. Although DNA sequencing has existed since 1970s, it was quite expensive. It was not until 2005, with the advent of the next generation high throughput sequencing, that it became economically feasible to sequence the DNA of an entire environmental sample. And since then, the metagenomic studies have been increasingly common. In our institute, we are also having a Illumina MiSeq sequencer to support the microbiome-based research that is going on in our institute. Human microbiome investigations have now reached a critical inflection point, I say. We are transitioning from description and investigation to understanding the mechanism of action and developing new clinical interventions on the basis of these understanding. These advances have also created a pitch in investment, not only in academic research, but also in private sectors like pharmaceutical industries. This drive towards the clinical microbiome studies is supported by a revolution in the personalized medicine also. Our ability to rapidly characterize the microbiome offers an opportunity to develop the new diagnostic biomarkers and the therapeutics. In recent years, several next-gen sequencing technologies have been developed, as I have mentioned in my previous slide, which further facilitate the analysis of a large number of microbiomes in different environments and human body sites also, including the human gut, which is the most interesting one. 16S RNA amplicon sequencing and whole genome shotgun sequencing are two effective sequencing approaches, and both have been used to study the uncultivated microbial community. 16S rRNA sequencing focuses on the conserved 16S rRNA gene present in all microbes, and we attempt to reveal who is there in a given microbial community, while the shotgun metagenomic sequencing can be used to answer the complementary question of what they can do. First, we will discuss about the 16S rRNA sequencing of the human microbiome. Scientists often focus on two fundamental questions while investigating the human microbiome or any environmental microbiome. The first question seeks to identify the microbial composition, while the second question aims to understand the metabolic activity between the microbiome and the surviving host cell or tissue. In order to uncover the microbiome composition with continuously increasing sample size, novel culture-independent molecular and biochemical analysis such as next generation sequencing, that is the NGS of the 16S rRNA genes, is being used at increasing scale nowadays for detection and classification of the diverse microbes present in the human body. What is a 16S rRNA marker gene? It's a very common term used in the human microbiome study. A microbial community consists fundamentally of a collection of individual cells, each carrying distinct complement of genomic DNA. We can thus assign a frequency to each distinct genome within the community, describing either the absolute number of the cells in which it is carried or the relative abundance of it within the population. As it is really impractical to fully sequence every genome of a cell, microbial ecology has defined a number of molecular markers that uniquely tag the distinct genomes. A marker is a DNA sequence that identifies the genome that contains it without the need to sequence the entire genome. A marker should be present in every member of the population and should differ only and always between individuals with distinct genomes and should differ proportionally to evolutionary distance between the distinct genomes. The most omnipresent is the 16S ribosomal RNA subunit gene. This is a 1.5 kilobase pair gene, and this is commonly referred as 16S rRNA or sometimes rDNA. It satisfies all the criteria of the marker gene by containing both highly conserved and omnipresent sequence regions that vary with greater or lesser frequency over evolutionary time. Sequences assayed in this manner have been characterized for a wide range of cultured species and environmental isolates, and they can be automatically matched against the several databases like Green Genes, Ribosomal Database Project, and the database like Silva. A bioinformatics challenge arises in the analysis of 16S RNA genes in the definition of a unique sequence. Although much of the 16S RNA gene is highly conserved, but the bacterial 16S RNA gene contains hypervariable region. You can see here, the green regions are the conserved regions, and the V1 to V9 are the hypervariable regions that demonstrate considerable sequence diversity among the different bacteria. Specific sequences within a given hypervariable region constitute useful targets for diagnostic assays and other scientific investigations. So the next thing we do, once we have the 16S RNA sequences with us, we carry on binning of those 16S sequences into OTUs. And what is that? Horizontal transfer, multi-copy, or ambiguous rRNA markers are other confusing factors that can blur the biological meaning of species, as well as our ability to resolve them. 16S regions are typically sequenced using only a single pass. Therefore, there must be a chance that they will contain at least one sequencing error. Therefore, some degree of sequence similarity cutoffs like 95%, 97%, 99% are often used in practice, resulting clusters of nearly identical genomes, which are known as operational taxonomic units or OTU. As you can see in this figure, we have used 97% identity thresholds and categorized the sequences into different clusters. So this operational taxonomic units replace the species or genus in microbiome diversity analysis, because named species or named genus are often unavailable for particular marker sequences. The assignments of these OTUs is referred to as binning. This process is referred to as binning, where we are classifying these sequences into different categories or different clusters. This is called the binning. This binning can be done in three ways. First one is the unsupervised clustering of similar sequences. Next is the phylogenetic models that incorporate the mutation rates and evolutionary relationship. And another one is the supervised clustering, or the most simple one, where we directly assign sequences to taxonomic beans based on labeled training data. The binning process allows a community to be analyzed in terms of discrete beans or OTUs, opening up a range of computationally good representation of the biological sequences. Next, what we do is the taxonomic classification and the population diversity analysis. If each OTU or the operational taxonomic unit is treated as distinct category, or each 16S sequence is beamed into a named phylum or other taxonomic category, a pool of microbiome sequences can be represented as a histogram of bean counts. Bioinformaticians studying 16S sequences must choose whether to analyze a collection of taxonomically bean microbes as a set of abundance histogram or as a set of binary presence-absence vectors. However, both the representations can be used as an input to the decomposition method, such as the principal component analysis, to determine which OTUs represent the most significant sources of population variance and correlate with the community metadata like the temperature, pH, or the clinical features. An important concept when dealing with the OTUs or the operational taxonomic units or other taxonomic beans is that population diversity. What is population diversity? That is the number of distinct beans in a sample or a population. This is significant. These have a very high significance in human health, since a number of disease conditions have been shown to correlate with the microbiome diversity. Now, how will we measure the population diversity? Two well-defined questions arise when quantifying the population diversity. If I have sequenced some amount of diversity, how much more exists in my microbiome? Is something left? And how much do I need to sequence more to completely characterize my microbiome? Within a community, several estimators like the abundance-based coverage estimator or ACE or CHA1 exist for calculating the number of taxa expected within the single population, that is the richness, and the distribution of the taxa expected within a single population, that is the evenness, that you can see in this figure, the last one. It is it has high richness as well as high evenness, because the type of the fruit is also higher and the abundance of each type of food is also higher. So it is as rich as well as even, this population we can say. So this gives rise to figures known as the rarefaction curves, a figure like this. Since increasing number of sequence taxa allows to produce increasingly precise estimates of total population diversity. And alpha diversity thus measures as thus appears to be a summary statistics of a single population, while a beta diversity measures act like a similarity score. We use beta diversity to compare multiple populations and measure how many taxa are shared between them, as you can see in this figure. Alpha diversity is often quantified by Shannon index, Simpson index. Beta diversity can be measured by simple taxa overlap or by quantified by Bray-Curtis dissimilarity. So I can repeat again that the alpha diversity acts like a summary statistics of a single population, whereas beta diversity acts like a similarity score between the population. It is another type of measuring popular diversity means. So the diversity within or among the communities can be also analyzed in terms of its phylogenetic distribution rather than by isolating them into discrete beans. So this is something different from isolating the taxa from the discrete beans. This method of quantifying community diversity described in terms of total breadth or depth of the phylogenetic branches spanned by the microbiome. For example, consider a collection of n highly related 16S sequences. This might be treated either as one OTU or it can be treated as n distinct taxa, depending on how finely you are weaning it. But a phylogenetic analysis will always consider them to span a small evolutionary distance, no matter how large the n becomes. OTU-based and phylogenetic methods tend to be complementary in that each will reveal different aspects of community structure. Several standard metrics like the UniPrac exist for quantifying the phylogenetic diversity of a population. Unlike the 16S sequencing, which only targets the 16S rRNA genes, shotgun metagenomic shotgun metagenomic sequencing methods are also there. That sequences all given genomic DNA from a sample, not only the 16S. Here they sequence all the given genomic DNA for a sample. A typical workflow for taxonomy analysis of shotgun metagenomic data includes quality trimming and comparison to a reference database comprising whole genome or selected marker genes to generate a taxonomic profile. Because the shotgun metagenomic sequencing covers all genetic information in a sample, the data can be used for an additional analysis like the metagenomic and assembly and binning, metabolic function profiling, antibiotic resistant gene profiling, etc. Metatranscriptomics, a close relative, implies shotgun sequencing of reverse transcribed RNA transcripts, and metaproteomics implies the quantification of the protein or peptide levels. And metabolomics is there, that implies the investigation of small molecule metabolites. Of all these assays, the last three I mentioned, that is the metatranscriptomics, metaproteomics, and metabolomics, are still in their infancy stage, and they are generally carried out using roughly the same technologies as their culture-based counterparts. Now, unlike, as you all know, when we do the whole genome shotgun sequencing of individual organism in human microbiome, we do not deal with the individual organism. It is a metagenomic data. So we are having multiple number of organisms in the sample. So unlike the whole genome shotgun sequencing of individual genomes, in which the end product is typically a single fully assembled genome, metagenomes do not possess such a single finish line. The simplest is no assembly at all. The short reads produced as a primary data, after cleaning to reduce sequencing error, they are treated as taxonomic markers or gene fragments and analyzed directly. Since microbial genomes typically contain few intergenic regions, most fragments will contain pieces of one or more genes. These can be used to quantify the enzymatic pathway abundance directly. Metagenome-specific assembly algorithms have been proposed that reconstruct only the open reading frames from a population, avoiding the assembly of larger contents. The most challenging option is to attempt full assembly for complete genomes present in that community, which is rarely possible, and it is only possible if we are considering very simple communities or with extreme sequencing depth. If successful, this has the obvious benefit of establishing synteny, structural variation, and opening up the range of tools developed for the whole genome analysis study. A key bioinformatic trade-off in analyzing the metagenomic sequencing, regardless of their degree of assembly, is whether they should be analyzed by homology or they should be analyzed de novo, or we will apply both, a combination of both homology or de novo. An important task is to determine which part of each sequence read encode one or more genes. That is the gene finding or gene calling technique. By homology, each sequences can be blasted against a large database of reference genomes, which will retrieve any similar known reading frames. The boundary of these regions of similarity thus become the start and stop of the metagenomic open reading frames. This method is robust to sequencing and assembly errors, but it is sensitive to the contents of the reference database. Conversely, de novo methods have been developed to directly bin and call genes within the metagenomic sequences using DNA features alone, like the GC content, codon usage, etc. Most of the de novo methods rely on the interpolated or profile hidden Markov models, or on the some machine learning methods that perform classification based on the encoded sequence feature. This is a far more challenging task, making it sensitive to errors in the computational prediction process, but it enables a greater range of discovery and community characterization by relying less on the prior knowledge or the database knowledge. Hybrid methods will consume both the sequence similarity and de novo sequence features as input, and for some tasks such as some systems It represents a very sweet spot between the computational complexity, availability of prior knowledge, and biological accuracy. Till now, I was talking about who is there. Now I will tell about what are they doing. Essentially, any analysis of a microbial community is functional in the sense that it aims to determine the overall phenotypic consequences of the community's composition and biomolecular activity. The approach referred to as computational functional metagenomics. This approach typically focuses on the function of individual genes and gene products within a community. Functional metagenomics help to catalog some or all of the gene products present in that community and assign them molecular function and biological role. The simplest technique will definitely rely on the BLAST. It will have two types of approach. A top-down investigation where we can blast the representatives of the gene families, each of the gene families of interest into the community metagenome to determine their presence and abundance. And bottom-up approach, in the bottom-up approach, we will blast the reads or contents from a metagenome into a large annotated reference database by homology. As each metagenomic sample can contain millions of reads, and the database also contains millions of sequences, computational efficiency is a critical consideration. Whatever approach you use, either top-down and bottom-up. Therefore, more flexible characterization of the sequence functions, such as the hidden Markov models, tend to simultaneously increase the coverage, accuracy, and the computational expense. The end result of the functional metagenomic is an abundance profile for each metagenomic sample, quantifying the frequency of the gene products in that community. Gene products in such profile is identified by the functional descriptors like the gene ontology or the Go terms or the KEGG terms, and protein families such as the PFAMs, or the what I can say is the COGS. So after profiling the metabolic functions, the next task would be to profile the metabolic and the functional pathways. Once we have an abundance profile of the orthologous families, the next step we have to do is to assemble them into profiles of metabolic and functional pathways. This requires an appropriate catalog of reference pathways like MetaSeq or KEGG. The pathway inferences process is similar to that performed when annotating. We annotate an individual newly sequenced genome, and it will have three main steps. So first we will assign each ortholog to one or more pathways. Then the gap filling will be carried out, or the interpolation of the missing annotation will be there. And then we will determine the presence or absence of each pathway. A final but very important aspect of translational metagenomics lies in the understanding not only the microbial community, but also its environment, that is its host, and its interaction with its host. Our microbiota would be of interest to basic research if they are not heavily influenced by their host immunity, and in turn it has a major influence on the host health and disease. For this reason only, the human gut microbiome has proven to be very difficult to study, because it is so intimately related to the physiology of its host. There are several factors that is influencing the human microbiome. To alter the microbiome deliberately for preventing purposes, or to use it to understand a particular medical condition, these factors that influence its composition, we should understand first. The first factor is the human genetics and the immune interactions during the early development of life. The composition of human microbiome is unique in each of the individual. Each identical twins are even barely more similar to one another in microbial composition and structure. The large majority of microbiome colonization occurs in the early years of life. Shortly after birth, newborns are exposed to maternal and environmental microbes. Initiating the gut microbiome establishment. Within the first year of the life, an estimated amount of 500 to 1,000 species of microbes colonize in our gastrointestinal tract. With its interaction with the environment, or we can say it's after the weaning, the gut microbiota becomes firmly established, leading to a lifelong microbe signature in the healthy individual. Mode of birth delivery is a very, very important factor for the human microbiome establishment. Mode of birth delivery, hospitalization, diet, nature of feeding are very important factors. It has impact on the composition and diversity of the infant microbiota. Early microbial colonization of a newborn begins at birth. The microbiota of vaginally delivered newborns represent the maternal, vaginal, and intestinal microbiota, while the newborns who are delivered via cesarean delivery exhibited a microbiome representative of the maternal skin microbiota, including Staphylococcus. Vaginally delivered newborns exhibited bacterial communities composed of several prominent genera, including the Lactobacillus, Prevotella, E. coli, bacteroids, Bifidobacterium, and Streptococcus. Different molecular methods have confirmed the reduced proportion of Bifidobacterium or bacteroids in the GI tract of infants delivered via cesarean delivery. The first foods, what we are having, what we are offering to our babies are very important factors. Beneficial factors in the breast milk include the immunoglobulins, cytokines, growth factors, lysozymes, lactoferrin, etc. Carbohydrate components are also found in breast milk and function similarly in prebiotics. They are prebiotics. They are similar to prebiotics, stimulating the growth of the Bifidobacterium and thereby selectively altering the microbial composition in the infant intestine. Anaerobes such as Bifidobacterium appear during the first week of life. A high relative abundance of Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus in the microbiomes of the breastfed infants have been found. Increased colonization by Clostridium and particularly the Clostridium difficile in the formula-fed infants compared with the breastfed infants have been found in different studies also. The greater abundance of C. difficile in the intestinal microbiota of the formula-fed infants has also been associated with the eczema in infants. Breastfed, vaginally delivered infants exhibited reduced colonization by C. difficile and E. coli, and enhanced colonization by beneficial microbes like Bifidobacteria. The proliferation of beneficial microbes supported by the breastfeeding may provide the protection from the disorders such as allergies, neonatal diarrhea, neonatal enterocolitis, obesity, and the type 2 diabetes. The next factor is the body site. When the microbiomes at a given body site of a large cohorts of people are compared, individuals fit on a range of microbial diversity within a human population rather than clustering into discrete groups. During human development, the human microbiome follows body site specific trajectories such that each body site develops a specific biogeography. For example, the skin shows dramatic variation in microbiome composition and structure across different sites. These factors play a role in shaping the individuality of the microbiome so that each person develops a unique microbial signature on their skin, irrespective of their differences between the skin sites. Longitudinal characterization of the human gut microbiome has shown that microbiota in the adult remain relatively stable and are unique to each person, which stands in contrast with the drastic change over the first 3 years of life. Changes in diet can profoundly impact the gut microbial community structure. On the other hand, vigorous cleaning can temporarily alter the skin microbiome. Another important factor is hospitalization and gestational age. Hospitalization and gestational age may impact the composition and development of the intestinal microbiota. Increased hospital stays have been associated with delays in colonization and development of the infant intestinal microbiota, which could result from exposure to different microbes or antibiotic treatment. For example, increased colonization by C. difficile was observed in both preterm infants and the infants hospitalized after birth, which could be attributed to the persistence of C. difficile spore in the hospital environment. Moreover, the intestinal microbiota of preterm infants exhibited significantly reduced bacterial diversity. Diet. Yes, diet is a very, very important factor and we all must know it. Diet has been extensively studied in relation to the gut microbiome. Modulating the diet is an ideal opportunity for low risk intervention to change our microbiome. Low-term diet has very large effect on gut microbiome composition. Even extreme short-term dietary change can influence the gut microbiomes of different people to resemble one another within days. Effects of the same dietary ingredients on blood glucose can vary in different people, an effect which is mediated by the human microbiome. The next one is the antibiotic. The gut microbiome in adults appear not to be flexible to repeated antibiotic administration. The same antibiotic appears to affect particular microbes differently depending on the rest of the microbiome, and this happens due to the different growth phases, metabolic states, and the contingent microbial network in which those microorganisms exist. There are lots of evidence that antibiotics taken early in life have a profound effect on the gut microbiome that can result in our later development of obesity, asthma, inflammatory bowel disease, and other disorders. So we should be very much conscious when we are taking antibiotic. Our lifestyle, yes, our lifestyle has a strong influence on our microbiome composition. Cohabitation with the pets, such as the dogs, has statistically significant association with the microbiome composition. For example, pet ownership and exposure to livestock have been associated with a decreased risk of the asthma. Interrupting this exposure in infant has been shown to lead substantial increase in asthma in them. Other lifestyle traits are also there that correlate with the composition of the human microbiome. For example, if you do exercise, then it appears to influence your structure of microbiome through reducing the inflammation, which produces subtle changes in the microbial community composition. Sleep deprivation correlates with the changes in the gut microbiome. There is a greater ratio of firmicutes to bacteroids and elevated abundance of Coriobaccteriaceae associated with the sleep loss. Stress increases intestinal permeability and it is correlated with the changes in bacteroidetes and actinobacteria. Occupation is also related, or occupations can also influence your microbiome. And how it's done? It's via exposure to different environments and place of residence. For example, the farmers have a different microbiome than the city workers. The oral microbiota of the sailors is significantly altered by their occupational activities after 120 days at sea. They show an increase in streptococcus in their oral microbiota. The dynamics of human microbiome, how it occurs. The human microbiota affect host physiology to a great extent. Trillions of microbes colonize our body, including the bacteria, archaea, viruses, and eukaryotic microbes. I have already discussed with you that the microbiotic composition and function differ according to the different location and ages, sexes, races, and the diets of the host. Commensal bacteria colonize the host shortly after birth. This simple community gradually develops into a highly diverse ecosystem during host growth. Over time, host bacterial association have developed into very beneficial relationships. Symbiotic bacteria metabolize indigestible compounds, supply essential nutrients, defend against colonization by opportunistic pathogens, and contribute to the formation of intestinal architecture. For example, the intestinal microbiota is involved in the digestion of certain foods that cannot be digested by the stomach and small intestine, and plays a key role in maintaining the energy homeostasis. These foods are primarily the dietary fibers such as xyloglucans, which are commonly found in the vegetables, and they can be digested by specific species of the bacteroids. Other non-digestible fibers such as fructooligosaccharides and oligosaccharides can be utilized by beneficial microbes such as lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. The gut microbiota has shown to deliver vitamins to the host such as folates, vitamin K, vitamin B2, vitamin B12, and possibly some other vitamins also. Not all microbiota lead to health benefits. Some induce inflammation under certain conditions. Now, the last part of our talk, and I will discuss about the role of the human microbiota in disease. The human microbiota, how it affects the infectious diseases. Infection is one of the most common diseases caused by the dysbiosis of the microbiota. Importantly, infectious disease and its treatment have a profound impact on human microbiota, which in turn determines the outcome of the infectious diseases in human host. There is an intimate relationship between the infection and dysbiosis of the human microbiota. Infection is associated not only with the microbiome, but also with the viruses. For example, the intestinal microbiota of patients with Clostridium difficile infection is significantly altered. Disturbance of microbiota is also associated with the progression of human immunodeficiency virus, hepatitis B virus, and other diseases. I will tell about some different infectious diseases and the effect of human microbiota on them. The first one I'm going to discuss is the infection with the Clostridium difficile. The pathological overgrowth of the Clostridium difficile is usually related to antibiotic-associated diarrhea, which is one of the most frequent complications that we have following antibiotic administration in our body, and which is now a growing public health threat. C. difficile is a component of our gut microbiome. Antibiotics disturb the intestinal mucosa homeostasis and decrease the resistance against toxin-producing C. difficile and promoting the progression of those C. difficile infections. The fecal bacterial diversity is reduced and the microbial composition dramatically shifts in patients following the antibiotic resistance. Next one is the infection with the Helicobacter pylori. Helicobacter pylori are the pathogens that induces pectic diseases. It was recently found to be related to the progress of periodontitis. There is a strong correlation between the H. pylori infection with the periodontal pathogens and inflammation. Frequencies of Porphyromonas gingivalis, Prevotella intermedia, Fusobacterium nucleatum, and Tripolima denticola are significantly higher in patients infected with the Helicobacter pylori infection than in those without the infection, whereas the frequency of the Agribacter we found lower in case of the patients having the Helicobacter pylori infection. This indicates that Helicobacter pylori might promote the growth of some periodontal pathogens and aggravate the progress of chronic periodontitis. Now, another important bacterial infection called the bacterial vaginosis, and it is associated with numerous adverse health outcomes, including the preterm birth and the acquisition of sexually transmitted infections. Bacterial vaginosis is regarded as an etiological disorder of the vaginal microbiota. A profound shift in the absolute and relative abundance of bacterial species present in the vagina has been found in case of the woman infected with the bacterial vaginosis. Prevalence of Gardnerella vaginalis, bacteroids, Prevotella, Peptostreptococcus were found in case of the woman with bacterial vaginosis infection. These genera may be used as a targets for clinical diagnosis for this disease, that is bacterial vaginosis, by means of the molecular approaches. Infection with the human immune deficiency virus. At present, HIV continues to be a major global public health issue. The gut microbiomes in patients with HIV are significantly disturbed, and there are significant increase in the ratio of firmicutes to bacteroidetes of the patients infected with the HIV-1. Although the viral loads of HIV-1 are reduced after a short-term course of effective antiretroviral therapy, the diversity and composition of the fecal microbiota are not restored. The dysbiosis remains. The vaginal microbiome might affect the risk of HIV infection. Prevotella bivia, a bacterium present in the vagina, has been identified as a cause of the inflammation. Gardnerella in the vagina has been also found responsible for the high infection rates in the South African women. The reason behind this is that this Gardnerella globals up the tenofovir. Tenofovir is the drug that is used in the antiretroviral therapy for the HIV patients. And with this, the Gardnerella can rapidly decrease the level of the drug, leading to the tenofovir treatment failure. The human microbiome is also associated with different liver diseases, various of liver diseases. There is a close interaction of the GI tract and the liver, as well as the chronic exposure of the liver to the gut-derived factors, including the bacteria and bacterial components. The intestinal microbiota produces ethanol, ammonia, and acetaldehyde. These products may influence liver function through endotoxin release or liver metabolism. Alternation in the intestinal microbiota plays an important role in promoting the liver damage progression. Liver disease is usually accompanied by an increase in the Enterobacteriaceae and decrease in the Bifidobacterium, as I have mentioned here. Patients with liver cirrhosis. The first one I am going to discuss is the liver cirrhosis. Patients with liver cirrhosis have an altered bacterial composition in their gut. Fecal microbial communities are distinct in patients with cirrhosis compared with the healthy individuals. Bacteroidetes have been found to be reduced in cirrhotic patients, while the number of species of Proteobacteria and Fusobacteria increased. Even dysbiosis of the duodenal mucosal microbiota has been detected in the liver cirrhosis patients. Duodenum dysbiosis might be related to the alterations in the oral microbiota also. The oral microbiota is one of the most important microbial communities in our body. The diversity and composition of our oral microbiome, with the diversity and composition of the oral microbiome of the liver cirrhosis patients are significantly differ from those of that of the healthy ones. Patients with chronic liver diseases show oral diseases also. Acute that is the ACLF syndrome, that is the acute on chronic liver failure syndrome, ACLF. It has high mortality. It has high mortality rate, and it is characterized by the failure of an organ like the liver or the heart. Correlation between the specific bacterial families and inflammatory cytokines in ACLF patients have been found. The relative abundance of Pasteurella-C have been found to predict the mortality rate, and thus indicating the gut dysbiosis is associated with the mortality of the ACLF patients. Next, I come to the autoimmune liver diseases. Gut flora is relevant to the pathogenesis of the autoimmune liver diseases also. Significant increase in the abundance of the E. coli, Lachnospiraceae, and the Megaspira, and near absence of bacteroids is related to the autoimmune liver diseases. The last one for the liver diseases is the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Obesity and insulin resistance are the factors promoting the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Alterations in the gut microbiota are considered to be a key factor contributing to the NAFLD. NAFLD was found to be associated with large number of bacteroids and Ruminococcus and decreased level of Prevotella. The human microbiome has a close relationship with the gastric and colorectal cancer also. H. pylori associated with chronic inflammation is is considered to be a strongest factor for the gastric cancer. The gastric bacterial microbiome does not provide convincing evidence to expand their role in cancer pathogenesis. The carcinogenic risk may be related to the genetic diversity of the H. pylori strain, variation in host responses, and specific host microbiome interactions. It has been found that compromised immune response promotes the H. pylori evasion. Microbial dysbiosis have been implicated in the etiology of the colorectal cancer. This is very important. The microbiota in cases of the colorectal cancer is characterized by a high proportion of potential pathogens such as Pseudomonas, Helicobacter, Acinetobacter, and Fusobacterium nucleata, and by a lower richness of some beneficial bacteria such as the butyrate producing bacteria. Fusobacterium nucleatum, a periodontal pathogen, has been suggested to be overabundant during disease progression from adenomas to cancer. Many bacteria-derived metabolites have been implicated in the suppression of colon cancer development. These include the short-chain fatty acids, which are produced through the microbial fermentation of the complex polysaccharides, include the acetate, propanoate, and butyrate. Butyrate, which is primarily produced by the species within the family Lecnosporoceae and Ruminococcaceae, has been shown to be protective against the colonic neoplasia. A high fiber intake reportedly leads to the reduction in the risk of development of colon malignancy because of the production of this butyrate. Therefore, the modulation of the gut microbiota through dietary control or antibiotic treatment may offer great therapeutic potential. The manipulation of gut microbiota to enhance the production of the short-chain fatty acids through the use of the prebiotics or non-digestible foods or fibers may be a promising approach to program the host metabolism, and therefore they can consequently influence our cancer risk. The next one is the esophageal cancer. Morbidity from esophageal cancer is related to the use of the antibiotics. Long-term changes in esophageal microbiome consumption after frequent antibiotic exposure may lead to higher incidence of this disease, resulting in an increasing morbidity. Importantly, with the decline of a Helicobacter pylori infection, the incidence of the esophageal adenocarcinoma were found to be increased. This probably indicates that H. pylori are playing a protective role in the development of the esophageal cancer. Human microbiomes are also related with the metabolic disorders. The composition of the gut microbiota is influenced by the use of antibiotics and by the lifestyle of the human host, including the exercise, diet, and hygiene preferences. The dysbiosis of the intestinal flora affects the production of immune mediators and induces both chronic inflammation and metabolic dysfunction. Obesity and its associated metabolic complications such as type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases have become a global epidemic health problem nowadays and are considered to be the consequences of the complex multi-directional interaction of the host genetics, diet, environment, and of course the gut microbiota. How our microbiome affects the development of type 2 diabetes in us. Type 2 diabetes is a prevalent metabolic disease. Gut microbiome characterized by lower diversity and flexibility is associated with the diabetes. The mechanism that caused the disease may be related to the translocation of the microbiota from the human gut to the tissues and thus indicating the inflammations. Human gut microbiome may induce insulin resistance through species such as Prevotella copri and Bacteroides vulgaris. The gut microbiota may directly influence type 2 diabetes through its effect on the metabolism of amino acids. Thus, future anti-diabetic treatment strategies may target bacterial strains that cause imbalances in the amino acid metabolism. Is your gut bacteria making you fat? Let's have the answer. Interactions between the gut microbiota and the host genotype or dietary changes may be a crucial factor that contribute to obesity and related metabolic disorder. Diet can modulate the composition and function of the human microbiome. Gut microbiota is an important modulator of the interaction between the diet and the development of the metabolic disease. The ratio of firmicutes to bacteroids, I have already mentioned this. The ratio of the firmicutes to bacteroids relative abundance has been found to be a biomarker indicative to the obesity susceptibility. In human, obesity is related to antibiotic therapy. Childhood obesity was linked with antibiotic exposure to infancy. For example, a 7-day clindamycin intervention modified the bacteroids community for up to 2 years. Even short-term ciprofloxacin exposure reduced the gut microbial diversity. Bacteroids was found to be prominent among obese, and its abundance is positively correlated with the BMI. A negative correlation of the BMI has been found with the Bifidobacterium, Arvinium, Succinic vibrio, and Alistypes. And these microbes were found to be more abundant in the person with normal weight. Gut microbes utilize the indigestible polysaccharides or fibers for the growth. Reduced intake of dietary carbohydrates is associated with the decrease in butyrate production, butyrate producing bacteria in the obese individual. Therefore, a low fiber diet enhances pathogen susceptibility by establishing a microbiota feeding on colon mucus of the host. I have already mentioned about the importance of the short chain fatty acids. It helps to lower pH and alter microbiota in colon by creating a niche favoring the growth of the butyrate producing bacteria. Thus, go for high fiber diet for a healthy life. Pulmonary microbiome and the diseases of the respiratory tracts. How it is controlled by pulmonary microbiome. Bacterial communities in the respiratory tract of intubated patients with ventilator-associated pneumonia caused by the pathogen Pseudomonas aeruginosa, associated with the loss of microbial diversity after antibiotic administration. Pyrosequencing revealed greater interpersonal variability of bacterial community composition in the lung of the patients with cystic fibrosis, which may be influenced by the colonization of the bacterial communities in the oral cavity. Alternation in the microbiota are implicated in the pathogenesis of a number of diseases such as the asthma, food allergies, autism, and major depressive disorders. Interestingly, these diseases may not be involved direct interactions with the microbiota. The regulating functions of the microbiota may participate in the specific pathways of these diseases. The complex microbiota-host interactions are dynamic, involving a variety of mechanisms that include the immune, hormonal, and the neural pathways. Therefore, changes in the microbiota may result in the dysregulation of the host homeostasis and in increased susceptibility to these diseases. Among them, the first one I'm going to discuss is the allergic diseases and how the allergies in us is controlled by the human microbiome or our microbiome. An early life antibiotic-driven low diversity in the gut microbiota enhances susceptibility to the allergy asthma and also influences asthma development in the childhood. Of course, the mode, the place of delivery, and the infant feeding affect our GI tract microbiome composition. I have already said this. Infants with a gut microbiota enriched in Clostridium and Firmicutes at a host age of nearly 3 to 6 months are associated with cow milk allergy by the age when they reach 8 years. Because the intestinal microbiota of an infant evolves rapidly in the first year, the early life of the gut microbiota composition may be one of the determinants of the cow milk allergy outcomes in the childhood. The gut microbiota interacts with the immune system intimately, providing signals to promote the maturation of the regulatory antigen presenting cells and regulatory T cells, which may play a crucial role in the development of the immunological tolerance. Specific members of microbiota such as Clostridium and some other bacteria regulate the immunoglobulin E level or IgE level in our body. Interestingly, the psychiatric diseases are also controlled by our human microbiome or our microbiome. There is a word called the gut-brain axis. The existence of the gut-brain axis has been recognized for decades. The gut-brain axis is the biochemical signaling that takes place between the GI tract and the central nervous system. The gut-brain axis play a key role in maintaining the normal brain and GI function. The concept of this axis has been extended nowadays to microbiota gut-brain axis. The term microbiota gut-brain axis explicitly includes the role of gut flora in the biochemical signaling events that takes place between GI tract and the central nervous system. More recently, the gut microbiota has emerged as a critical regulator of this axis, including the endocrine system, neural system, and metabolic system, and as well as the immune system also. Autism spectrum disorder is correlated with altered gut microbiota. Low relative abundances of the bacteria like Akkermansia and Bifidobacterium have been found in the feces of the children who are suffering from the autism. And altered fecal microbiotic compositions in the patients with major depressive disorder has been also found. The major depressive disordered patients have been found to contain increased level of Enterobacteriaceae and Allistoids in their feces, but reduced levels of Faecalibacterium. How we can use human microbiome for our treatment, or how we can manipulate our microbiome. Is it possible? Yes. Manipulation of human microbiome includes microbial supplements, that is, we know that is called the probiotics, very much familiar terms nowadays, foods or substrates, that is diets or prebiotics, and microbial suppression or elimination strategies, that is antibiotics. Beneficial microbes such as Lactobacillus, Bifidobacterium, and Streptococcus are commonly used as probiotics, which are defined as live organisms which, when administered in adequate amounts, will confer us a health benefit. And symbiotic, which may be a newer term to all of us. Symbiotic is a combination of probiotics and prebiotics. It has been also used to treat the inflammatory diseases. Other therapies effective in restoring the normal bacterial communities includes the transplantation of the fecal microbiota from a healthy donor to a patient. Analysis of human microbiota could result in the development of naturally derived drugs to treat chronic inflammation. Combination of antibiotics, probiotics, and diet yield a potent strategy to manipulate and reshape our disease-prone microbiome. So how we can apply our microbiome in a positive way? Yes, really, our microbiome is a treasure trove. The human microbiome can be considered as an important origin of resources for our genetic diversity, a modifier of our diseases, an essential component for controlling our immunity, and a functional entity that influences metabolism and modulates drug interactions. On one hand, there are many potential probiotics or beneficial bacteria that may prevent or treat certain diseases. On one hand, on the other hand, human microbiota, we can consider it as our second genome. The human microbiome must produce a large number of metabolites for us. With the increasing understanding of the relationship between the human microbiome and a variety of diseases, we can predict or diagnose diseases with a great deal of attention. Enrichments of some microbes are noted as potential biomarkers in some research. It has been found that the Bifidobacterium and Enterobacteriaceae ratio indicates the microbial colonization resistance of the bowel. And this ratio is considered to be an indicator of the human microbiome health. The Bifidobacterium and Enterobacteriaceae ratio is higher than 1 in people with healthy microbiome, where it is far below 1 in patients with liver cirrhosis and patients with avian influenza infection. The prevention and treatment of diseases by targeting the microbiome has been successfully applied in the clinic. The administration of the probiotics is reported to restore our health and even for the patients having avian influenza infections more quickly. Fecal microbiome transplantation has exhibited better clinical efficacy than antibiotics in the treatment of C. difficile infections. Substantial progress has been also made in the treatment of liver diseases by modulating the gut microbiome. The regulation of human microbiome plays an important role in the treatment of gastrointestinal tract diseases such as the infectious diarrhea, antibiotic-associated diarrhea, and inflammatory bowel diseases. Modulation of the gut microbiome may also contribute to the treatment of cancer. I have discussed a bit about cancer already today. Probiotics and their products have outstanding effects on the treatment of allergic diseases, especially in infants. With this, I end my today's lecture. I will be happy to answer questions from you. Tomorrow we are going to have our last talk of this four days long webinar series. Dr. Sujoy Chattopadhyay, head of our center, that is the Center of Health Science and Technology, is going to offer a lecture on microbial evolution, infectious diseases, and computational genomics at 3 p.m. tomorrow, that is August 7. This is going to be an exciting lecture. Please join with us tomorrow sharp at 3 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for such a wonderful talk. I guess there would be a lot of questions. Let's look at them one by one. So the first one is from Anubhav Das. So he is asking that, ma'am, is it possible to manipulate the microbiome to create desired immunological responses to fight against harmful pathogens? And he is also thanking you for this wonderful talk.
Yes, for the immunity, of course, if you are having a specific disease which is related to your immunity problem or like that, and of course it can be treated with some altered microbiome. Yes, it's possible.
Okay, moving on to next question from Bilkis Rahman. Ma'am, can you please share the PPT after the webinar? That's be really helpful. The slides are quite informative.
Yes, I will do it.
So there are more comments about how wonderful the seminar is. People are saying good, very good presentation. So there is one more question came from Shantanu Kuilla. So the question is, can we use microbiome in the place of drugs?
Yes, today I think by your media also we are quite habituated with the words probiotics. Those are the live microbiomes that we take and that we take for altering our microbiome composition only. In spite of using the antibiotics, these probiotics are really helpful for us for treating many diseases like inflammatory bowel diseases. One example I can say. Of course, we can use, yes.
Let's see if more questions are coming. So there's a comment from Pratima Brahma. It's a very informative discussion. And then, so from Shantanu Koila again, I mean to say that use live microbiome as medicine.
So first, are you there from the beginning of my talk? Microbiome means the genomic genomes, the genomic part of the human microbiota, or the trillions of microbes present in our body. That is called the human microbiome. And when the composition of this microbiome gets disturbed due to some different factors, about those factors I have already discussed, what happens? We get prone to the diseases. So probiotics or all those live microorganisms are there to do that only. So I can take your question that by taking human microbiome is within us.
Yeah, so the microbiota are live, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so the live, yeah, as I understood from your talks, the live bacteria are called, or bacteria and virus, or whatever microbes are there are microbiota, and their genome is called microbiome. Yeah, so so there's one more question from Shantanu again. Can human live without microbiome?
Never, never ever it's possible. More than the number of human cells we have, more than that microbe cell we are having in our body. So they are more beneficial to us than being bad. So we cannot live without them. I can more say we are more bacterial cells rather than human cells.
Okay, so there is a thank you message from Shantanu again. Yeah, let's see if any other questions are coming, or we can end the session here.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps
Dr.
it's,
Surekha.
yeah, and thank you very much. So if anyone have any other questions, any doubts, you could directly contact Dr. Banerjee. I believe she
And
provided
I
her.
have an interruption that if anyone wants the slides, please mail in the biosim so that I can provide the slides to the specific person.
Okay, then thank you once again. So well, I'm ending the meeting now. So tomorrow so whoever is present, we hope to see you again for tomorrow's webinar. Thank you.